On a freezing evening in a small grocery store, a young black clerk noticed an elderly woman quietly counting her last few dollars, only to realize she was still short. Her hands trembled, her eyes dropped in shame, and everyone around her pretended not to see. But he did. What he didn't know was that this tiny act of kindness would trigger a chain of events no one could have imagined, because someone powerful was watching from the shadows. And by the next morning, his entire life would change. How could a single moment turn into a storm that exposes everything America tries to ignore? Comment and tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories. Before anything went wrong, Malik Jordan's mornings always started the same way, quiet, cold, and heavy. At just 19, he carried more weight than most grown men. The worn sidewalks of his neighborhood, the thin winter air, and the long walk to Miller's Market were all reminders of a life lived on the edge of survival. Still, every day he showed up early, pushing open the store's back door long before customers arrived. Inside, the hum of refrigerators and the smell of floor cleaner felt familiar, almost safe. Malik worked with the steady focus of someone who couldn't afford mistakes. His manager, Linda Harper, often said he was the best clerk she had, but Malik never believed it. He just worked hard because he had no other choice. Home wasn't something he looked forward to. His father, Raymond Jordan, had once been a skilled mechanic, the kind of man neighbors trusted with their cars and advice. But after Malik's mother passed, grief hollowed Raymond from the inside out. The man who once fixed engines with steady hands now struggled to steady his own life. Bills piled up, shut-off notices became routine, and Malik, barely out of high school, became the one holding everything together. Most people Malik helped in the store never knew his story. They just saw a quiet young black clerk who bagged groceries faster than anyone. But behind that calm face was a boy stretched thin by responsibility, exhaustion, and a father he still hoped would come back to himself someday. This particular morning felt like every other, cold, gray, unremarkable. Malik stocked the soup aisle, straightened shelves, and tried to ignore the ache of hunger in his stomach. Yet somewhere beneath the surface, life was shifting. Something was coming for him, though he couldn't see it yet. Because before the day ended, Malik would cross paths with someone who appeared fragile and forgotten. And from that moment on, nothing in his world would ever be the same. The store grew busier as the morning pushed into midday, each customer adding another layer to Malik's exhaustion. Still, he kept moving, fast, careful, precise. He'd learned long ago that in places like this, people expected perfection from someone who looked like him. One mistake could become an excuse for judgment or worse, suspicion. So he stayed quiet, polite, invisible. By noon, the line at the register stretched almost to the back of the store. Malik rang up groceries with practiced speed, offering the same calm nod to every customer. Some nodded back, some avoided eye contact, and a few, like Greg Thompson, the man in the heavy jacket, watched him with the kind of look Malik had felt his whole life. Sharp, skeptical, a reminder that to some, a young black man behind a counter was still a threat until proven otherwise. Greg didn't say anything, but he didn't have to. Malik felt the weight of that stare every time he reached for a barcode. Still, he kept going because he needed the hours, the paycheck, the stability, fragile as it was. But then she walked in. An elderly white woman with trembling hands, wearing an old wool coat that looked thin against the bitter cold. Evelyn Whitmore moved slowly, almost cautiously, as if the world had become something she wasn't sure she belonged in anymore. She gathered a few simple items, a loaf of bread, a carton of milk, a small can of soup, and approached the register with quiet dignity. Malik greeted her gently, sensing something fragile behind her weathered smile. But when he announced the total, Evelyn's face changed. Her fingers shook harder as she opened her wallet. Inside were 2 crumpled bills and a handful of coins, barely enough to cover part of the cost. Her voice cracked before she finished speaking. She asked if he could remove the soup. Just the soup, the warm meal she probably needed most. Behind her, Greg let out a loud, irritated sigh, like her struggle was some personal inconvenience to him. Malik felt the air tighten, the judgment simmering. He'd seen this scene before, an older white woman embarrassed in public, a black clerk caught between compassion and the fear of being accused of mishandling money. One wrong move and people like Greg would twist it into a story that made Malik the villain. But he didn't hesitate. Malik reached into his own pocket and quietly placed $1 on the counter. He didn't do it for praise. He didn't do it for attention. He did it because watching her hands tremble reminded him of his mother's final months, when even counting change felt like a burden she tried to hide. The store went silent for a moment. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. She tried and failed to blink away. Malik simply bagged her items and handed them to her with a steady hand. But he didn't realize what he had started. Greg stepped forward next, still tense, still irritated. But something in his expression shifted as he watched Evelyn leave. Her frail shoulders, her slow steps, her quiet thankfulness, it struck something in him, maybe guilt, maybe recognition, maybe just humanity trying to reappear. Without warning, Greg told Malik to add the next customer's items to his bill. Then Erica Collins, exhausted in her hospital scrubs, offered to pay for the elderly man behind her. Then George Walker insisted on covering the teenager after him. It spread like a spark catching dry grass, one small act turning into dozens. Michelle Chen, standing near the dairy aisle, pulled out her phone and recorded the moment without realizing it would soon echo far beyond the store walls. What Malik didn't know was that this chain reaction, the kindness, the tension, the silent stares, was only the beginning. His life was about to collide with a world far wealthier, far louder, and far more dangerous than anything he'd ever known. And outside, somewhere miles away, a billionaire named Christopher Whitmore was about to see that video and realize the trembling woman in it was his mother. The video spread faster than anyone expected, first through local feeds, then across the state, and finally across the country. Within 48 hours, millions had watched a tired young black clerk quietly hand over $1 to a trembling elderly woman who couldn't afford her groceries. What the world didn't know, what Malik didn't know, was that this woman was the mother of one of the wealthiest men in the Midwest. Christopher Whitmore saw the clip on a business associate's phone. At first, it was just background noise, another viral moment. But then the camera panned, and there she was, Evelyn, his mother, wearing the same old wool coat she refused to replace, her hands shaking, her voice barely audible as she asked to put the soup back. Christopher froze. He replayed the video, once, twice, 6 times, each viewing cut deeper than the last. How could he have missed the signs? How could he let his own mother wander into a grocery store alone, hungry, counting coins she shouldn't have needed? He dropped everything, meetings, calls, deals worth millions. None of it mattered. All he could see was his mother's shame on a grainy video being shared by the world. Within hours, he was driving through the streets of Brookfield, searching, calling senior homes, questioning staff, following fragments of information until one clue led him to the last place she'd been seen alive, 3247 Oakwood Avenue. Inside that small, dimly lit house, Malik was heating soup for Evelyn. The power still flickered from shut-off notices he'd been juggling for months. The house carried the cold weight of struggle, thin walls, empty cabinets, and a silence that spoke of survival, not comfort. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table wrapped in a blanket Malik had insisted she take. She looked fragile but safe, safer than she had in months. Then came the knock, hard, urgent. Malik froze, Evelyn tensed. When he opened the door, the cold wind swept in, along with a man who looked out of place in every way. Sharp coat, expensive watch, eyes filled with panic and heartbreak. "Is Evelyn Whitmore here?" The words hit the room like a bolt. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice cracking. "Christopher!" Everything spilled out at once, tears he'd held for years, guilt he'd buried under work, and fear that he had already lost her forever. But that wasn't the moment that shattered Malik. It was when Christopher's gaze shifted to him. A long, heavy pause. Malik stood in a worn hoodie, hands still trembling from work, the weight of centuries of judgment pressing onto one moment. A wealthy white man staring at a young black clerk in a broken home, and for a heartbeat, Malik braced himself for the worst. Accusation, anger, blame, the familiar sting of being seen as the threat. Instead, Christopher exhaled shakily, stepped forward, and said the last words Malik ever expected to hear. "You saved my mother, and I need to know why." The answer Malik chose next would change everything. Christopher listened as Malik explained everything. Not dramatically, not for attention, but simply and quietly, the way someone speaks when life has taught them that no one usually listens. He spoke about finding Evelyn at the bus stop, shivering and alone. He spoke about the empty cabinets, the shut-off notices, the long nights spent trying to keep his father afloat while carrying the world on his own shoulders. And he spoke about why he helped her, because he saw his own mother in her trembling hands. That honesty disarmed Christopher more than any grand gesture ever could. For the first time in years, he truly saw his mother, not as an obligation, not as a calendar appointment, but as a woman who had given everything so he could rise. And it forced him to face a painful truth. In his pursuit of success, he had forgotten the very person who built him. In the days that followed, Christopher made choices that stunned everyone, including Malik. He moved his mother into a home she actually wanted, one with a kitchen she could cook in, a porch she could sit on, and a garden she could tend. He offered Malik a real path forward, a job that paid fairly, a place to live, and the chance to go back to school. Not charity, not pity, just recognition of a young man who had shown compassion when the world rarely offered him any. And for the first time in a long time, Malik's father, Raymond, found room to breathe. With support and accountability, he entered recovery, choosing the painful and slow road back to himself. The moment that changed all their lives began with just 85 cents, but its ripple went far beyond a grocery store. Evelyn regained dignity. Christopher rediscovered humanity. Raymond found a second chance. And Malik, a young black man who had been overlooked, underestimated, and quietly judged, proved that kindness born from struggle can reshape entire futures. But this story isn't rare. It's a reminder of the world we live in, a world where a black boy's compassion is questioned before it's appreciated, where struggle is ignored until it goes viral, and where simple humanity can feel revolutionary. So the real question is, how many lives could change if we chose to see each other, before a camera made us pay attention? If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And make sure you subscribe to Black Community Struggles for more powerful stories about justice, truth, and our community's fight to be seen.